Hi, boys and girls. It's time for Chapter 7 of The Indian in the Cupboard. I'm excited to read to you today. Yesterday, when I was reading to you, Omri was on his way to the store to replace the seed tray that Little Bear had used to build his longhouse. Chapter 7 is called Uninvited Brothers. Omri was not supposed to ride his bicycle in the road, but then he wasn't supposed to ride it on the pavement either. Not fast at any rate, so he compromised. He rode it slowly on the pavement as far as the corner and then bumped down off the curb and went like the wind. The hardware shop was still open and he bought the seed tray and the seeds and was just paying for them when he noticed something on the seed packet. Under the word marrow, it said another word in brackets. It said the word squash. Squash? So one of the three sisters was actually Marrow? On impulse, he asked the shopkeeper, "Do you know what maize is?" "Maize? Well, that's sweet corn, son." "Have you any seeds for that?" Outside, standing by Omri's bike, was Patrick. "Hi." "Hi, I saw you going in. What did you get?" Patrick asked. Omri showed him. "More presents for your Indian," said Patrick sarcastically. "Well, sort of. If what?" "If I can keep him long enough, till they grow." Patrick stared at him, and Omri stared back. "I've been to Yap," said Patrick. "I bought you something." "Yeah? What is it?" Slowly, Patrick took his hand out of his pocket and held it in front of him and opened the fingers. In his palm lay a cowboy on a horse, with a pistol in one hand pointing upward, or what would have been upward if it hadn't been lying on its side. Omri looked at it silently and then shook his head. "I'm sorry. I don't want it." "Why not?" said Patrick. "Now you can play a proper game, cowboy and Indians." "I don't think it's a good idea. They'd fight each other." "Isn't that the whole idea of cowboys and Indians?" "Yeah, but they might hurt each other." There was a pause, and then Patrick leaned forward and asked very slowly and loudly, "How can they hurt each other if they're made of plastic?" "Listen," said Omri. "Your Indian, now my Indian, isn't plastic. He's real." Patrick heaved a deep sigh and put the cowboy back in his pocket. He'd been friends with Omri for years, ever since they'd started school together, and they knew each other very, very well. Just as Patrick knew when Omri was lying, he also knew when he wasn't. The only trouble was this was a non-lie he just couldn't believe. "I need to see him," said Patrick. Omri debated with himself. He somehow felt that if he didn't share the secret with Patrick, their friendship would be over, and he didn't want that. And besides, the thrill of showing his Indian to someone was something he could not do without for much longer. "All right," he said, "come on home with me." Going home, they broke the law even more, riding on the road and with Patrick on the crossbar of his bike. They went around the back way by the alley in case anyone happened to be looking out of a window. Omri told Patrick, "He wants a fire. I suppose we can't make one indoors." "Oh, you could," Patrick said, "in a tin plate or something, like for indoor fireworks," said Patrick. Omri looked at him. "Let's collect some twigs." Patrick picked up a twig about a foot long, and Omri laughed. "That's no good. We're talking tiny twigs, like this." And he picked up some slivers off the privet hedge. "Does he want a fire to cook on?" said Patrick slowly. "Yeah, that's what he wants," said Omri. "Well, then that's no use. A fire made of those would burn out in a couple of seconds." Omri hadn't thought of that. "You know what you need is a bit of tar. That burns for ages, and you could put twigs on top of it to look like a real campfire." "Oh, that's a brilliant idea. I know they've been tarring a road nearby," said Patrick. "Come on, let's go." "No." "No," said Patrick. "Why not?" said Omri. "Well, 'cause I don't believe in him yet. I haven't seen him. I want to see it." "All right, but first I have to give this stuff to my dad." There was a further delay when his father at first insisted that Omri fill the seed tray with compost and plant the seeds in it right then and there. But when Omri gave him the corn seed as a present, he said, "Well, thanks. Oh, all right. I can see you're bursting to get away and play with your friend. You can do the planting tomorrow before school." Omri and Patrick rushed upstairs, and at the top of the steps, Omri stopped cold. His bedroom door, which he always shut automatically, was wide open. And just inside, crouching side by side with his backs to him, were his brothers. They were so still, absolutely still, that Omri knew they were watching something and he couldn't bear it. They had come into his room without his permission, and they had seen his Indian, and now they would tell everybody. His secret, his precious secret, his alone to keep or share secret was no longer a secret. Something broke inside of himself, and he heard himself scream, "Get out of my room! Get out of my room!" And both boys spun around. "Shut up," said Adel. "You're going to frighten him." Gillen came in to look for his rat, and he found it. And then he saw this absolutely fabulous little house you've made, and he called me in to look at it. Omri looked at the floor, and the seed tray with the longhouse was now nearly finished. It had been moved into the center of the room. It was that they had been looking at. And here's the picture. Let me see if I can get this right on your screen. "I can't get over it," Adel said. "How on earth did you do this without using any glue or anything? It's all done with tiny threads and pegs. It's beautiful." "It's absolutely terrific," he said, awestruck with admiration. "I didn't," he began. But Patrick, who had been gaping at the longhouse in amazement, gave him a heavy nudge that nearly knocked him over. "Well," said Omri, "would you mind leaving my room now and take that rat with you? Do not let him in here. This is my room." "And this is my magnifying glass, you know," echoed Gillen. He was obviously too overcome with admiration to be angry with Omri for pinching it from him. He was using it now to examine the fine details of the building. "I knew you were good at making things, but this is uncanny. You must have fingers like a fairy to tie those witchy little knots." "What's that?" he asked suddenly, and they all heard it, a faint whinny coming from under the bed. Omri was galvanized into action. At all costs, he must prevent them from finding out. "It's nothing, only that little clock dolphin I got in my Christmas stocking. I think it wound up and suddenly started clicking. You know how they do that. It's creepy sometimes, the way they start clicking." But by this time, the boys had leaped up, and Omri had to push them out the door. "Why are you in such a hurry to get rid of us?" said Gillen suspiciously. "Just go. You know you have to get out of my room when I ask you." He could hear the little horse whinnying some more. "I think that sounds like a pony," said Adel. "Oh, goodness. It's a pony, a tiny witchy pony under my bed. You're right," said Omri. At last the boys left, but not without glancing back suspiciously several times. And Omri slammed the door, bolted it, and leaned against it with both eyes closed. "Is it a pony?" whispered Patrick, agog. Which is like when your eyes are really big and you're like, whoa, shocked. Omri nodded. Then he opened his eyes, laid down, and peered under the bed. "Give me that flashlight from the chest of drawers." Patrick gave it to him and lay beside him. They peered together as the beam probed the darkness. "Crumbs," breathed Patrick reverently. "It's true." The horse was standing, seemingly alone, whinnying. When the light hit him, he stopped and turned his head. Omri could see a pair of leggings behind him. "It's all right, little bear. It's me," said Omri. Slowly, a crest of feathers, then a pair of eyes appeared over the top of the horse's back. "Who others?" he asked. "They're my brothers. It's okay. They didn't see you." "Good. Now come on out and meet my friend, Patrick." "Little Bear, here coming. Take horse. Run, hide." Little Bear jumped on the horse and rode proudly out. Wearing his new cloak and headdress, he gazed up at Patrick, who gazed back in wonder. Then he nodded to Patrick, who tried several times to say something, but Patrick was speechless. "Omri's friend, Little Bear friend," said Little Bear magnanimously. Patrick swallowed. His eyes seemed in danger of popping right out of his head. Little Bear waited politely, but when Patrick didn't speak, he rode over to the seed tray. The brothers had brought it out from behind the crate. They'd been careful, but the ramp had gotten moved. Omri hurried to put it back, and Little Bear rode the horse up the ramp, dismounted, and tied the horse to its halter by the post he had driven into the compost. Then he calmly went back to work on the house. Patrick licked his lips, swallowed twice, and croaked, "He's real, a real live Indian." "I told you," said Omri. "How did that happen?" "Don't ask me." "Something to do with, I'm not sure. Something happened. This old cupboard I have, maybe it's the key. I'm not sure. Something happened inside of it." "You mean it's not only him? You can do this with other things if you lock them in the cupboard?" "Well, only plastic things." An incredulous grin spread over Patrick's face. Then what are we waiting for? Let's bring loads of things to life, whole armies. And he sprang toward the biscuit tin. Omri grabbed him. No, wait, it's not so simple. Patrick, his hands already full of soldiers, was making for the cupboard. Why not? Because they'd all, don't you see, well, they'd all be real, like real humans. What do you mean? Little Bear isn't a toy. He's a real man. He really lived. Maybe he's still, I don't know, in the middle of his life somewhere else in America in 17 something or other. He's from the past, you see. I don't get it, Patrick said. Listen, Little Bear told me all about his life. He's fought in wars. He's scalped people and grown stuff like marrow and stuff like that. And he had a wife, and she died. He doesn't know how he got here, but he thinks it's magic, and he accepts magic, and he believes it. He thinks I'm some kind of spirit or something. It's just very confusing. Patrick's eyes strayed longingly and looked at the cupboard. So if you put all those men in there and they came to life, they'd be real men with real lives of their own, from their own times and countries, talking their own languages. You couldn't just set them up and make them do whatever you wanted them to do. They'd do what they wanted to do, or they might get terrified and run away. Oh gosh. Yes, said Omri. I tried it with an old Indian, and he actually died of fright when he saw me. It was awful. Look, if you don't believe me, I'll show you. And there inside of the cupboard still lay the body of the old chief, who made of plastic, but unmistakably dead, and not the dead the way some plastic soldiers looked, but the way real people looked, crumpled up and empty. Patrick picked it up and turned it in his hand. He'd put the soldier down. This isn't the one you brought at lunchtime, is it? Yeah. Oh, crumbs, said Patrick. You see what I mean, said Omri. Where's his headdress, said Patrick. Little Bear took it. He says he's the chief now. It made him even more bossy and difficult than he was before. And Omri thought it was humorous that he was using the word difficult, a word his mother often used when he was insisting on having his own way. Patrick put the dead Indian hurriedly away and wiped his hand on the seat of his jeans. Maybe this isn't as much fun as I thought, said Patrick. Omri considered this for a moment. No, it really isn't fun. They stared at Little Bear. He had finished the shell of the longhouse now, taking off his headdress and tucking it under his arm. He stooped and entered through the low doorway at one end. After a moment, he came out and looked up at Omri. Little Bear hungry? He said. You get deer, bear, moose, what food? No, Omri, I didn't get anything. He scowled. I say get. Why you not get? The shops are shut. Besides, said Omri, I'm not sure I like the idea of having bears shambling about in my bedroom, or having them killed. I'll give you meat and I'll give you fire and you can cook it. Little Bear looked baffled for a moment. Then he swiftly put on his headdress and drew himself up to his full height of almost 3 inches, 3 1/4 with all the feathers, and folded his arms and glared at Omri, very upset. Little Bear, chief now. Chief hunts, kills own meat. Not take me other kill. If not hunt, lose skill with my bow. For today, you give me meat. Tomorrow, go shop, get bear, plastic, make real. I hunt. Not here. Out, under the sky. Now fire. Give me fire. Patrick, who had been crouching, stood up. He, too, seemed to be under Little Bear's spell. I'll run and get the tar, he said. No, wait a minute, said Omri. I've got another idea. He ran downstairs. Fortunately, the living room was empty. In the coal scuttle beside the open fireplace was a packet of firelighters, which I imagine means matches. He broke a fairly large bit off one and wrapped it in a scrap of newspaper. Then he went to the kitchen, and his mother was standing at the sink peeling apples. Omri hesitated. Then he went to the refrigerator. Don't eat now, Mom, Omri. It's not supper time yet. Just a tiny bit, he said. There was a lovely chunk of raw meat on a plate. Omri sniffed his fingers, then wiped them hard on his sweater to get the stink of the firelighter off of them, and then took a big carving knife from the drawer, and with an anxious glance towards his mother's back, he sawed off a corner of the meat. Luckily, it was steak, and it cut easily. Even so, he nearly had the whole plate off the shelf and onto the floor before he got the corner off the end. His mother swung around just as he closed the refrigerator door. A tiny bit of what? What are you eating? She often reacted late to anything he said. Nothing, he said, hiding the raw bit of meat in his hand. Mom, can I borrow a tin plate? I don't have a tin plate, she said. Oh, you do. The one you bought Adel to go camping with. Well, I imagine that's in Adel's room somewhere. I haven't got it. A tiny bit of what? What did you take from the fridge? but Omri was already on his way upstairs. Adel was in his room doing homework. "What do you want?" he asked Omri as he crept in. "Can I borrow your plate? You know, the camping one?" "Oh, that," said Adel, going back to his French homework. "Can I have it?" "Yeah, I suppose. It's over there somewhere." Omri found it in a knapsack covered with disgusting bits of baked beans, dry and hard as cement. He hurried away to his own room with the plate. Whenever he'd been away from it for even a few minutes, he felt his heart beating in panic when he opened his door for fear for what he might find or not find. The burden of constant worrying was beginning to wear him out. But all was as he had left it this time. Patrick was crouching near the seed tray, and Little Bear was directing him to take the top off several of the jars of poster paint, while he himself fashioned something too small to see. "It's a paintbrush," whispered Patrick. "He cut a bit of his own hair and tied it to a scrap of wood about the size of a splinter. He made a paintbrush." "Pour a bit of paint into the lid so he can dip it," said Omri. Meanwhile, he was scraping the dry beans off the plate of his brother's with his nails. He took the fragment of the firelighter and the twigs out of his pocket and arranged them in the center of the plate. He washed the bit of meat in his bedside water glass. Oh, that does not sound good to me. He'd had a wonderful idea for a spit to cook it on, from a flat box in which his erector set had been neatly laid out, but now looked like chaos. He took a rod, and he bent the handle shape and pushed that through the meat. Then, from small bits of the set, he quickly made a sort of stand to rest it on, with legs on each side, so that the fire met the meat in the middle, and the meat hung over the middle of it. "Let's light it now," said Patrick, who was getting very excited. "Little Bear, come see first," said Omri. Little Bear looked up from his paints and ran down the ramp, across the carpet, and vaulted onto the edge of the plate. Omri struck a match and lit the fire lighter, which flared up at once with a bluish faint flame, engulfing the twigs and the meat at once. The twigs gave off a gratifying cackle, and the firelighter gave off a very ungratifying stench, which made Little Bear wrinkle up his nose. "Stink!" he cried. "You spoil meat." "No, it won't," said Omri. "Turn the handle of the spit, Little Bear." Evidently he wasn't much used to spits, but he soon got the hang of it. The chunk of steak turned and turned in the flame, and soon it lost its raw, juicy red look and began to go gray and then eventually brown. The good, juicy smell of roasting beef began to compete with the smell of the firelighter. "Mmm," said Little Bear. "Meat," as he turned and turned and turned the meat, with sweat coming off of his face. He had already thrown off his cloak, and his chest shone red from the fire. Patrick couldn't take his eyes off of him. "Please, Omri," whispered Patrick. "Can't I have an Indian too? Couldn't I even just choose one, maybe a soldier or anything I liked, and make him come to life in your cupboard for myself?" Well, that's the end of chapter 7. Do you think Patrick is going to get a little plastic toy? Is Omri going to allow that? I don't know. We'll find out next time. Bye.